This is called awareness through movement,
Mhm.
but it's not really a movement class. It's not a movement class at all. We use movement to focus our attention. So if you do meditation, you sit quietly and you learn how to focus your mind, however, the technique. For awareness through movement, it's a different way of focusing your mind, but through what you're feeling. So even though I will give you instructions for movements, it's not important to be excellent at the movement. It's important to pay attention to how the movement feels. What's significant about it is you can slowly start to learn when you use unnecessary effort or force, or if there's some kind of feeling of holding or contracting. Most of us have those feelings all the time and we don't recognize them. We walk down the street, we're clenching our teeth or we're clenching our something. We know we feel uncomfortable, but we don't even know what we're doing. So, this is part of a practice where you become more and more clear about what you're doing and what you're feeling. And what's interesting is there's the mental piece where you listen to the instructions, you try to understand what is this instruction and then you try to feel the thing. But that's one department of your brain. The other department of your brain is your neurological department, and changes will happen whether you think about them or control them or not. Cool thing about the neurological part of your brain is when you have a framework that is at ease, not relaxed, not forced, it will improve how the neurological part of your brain makes connections.
Mhm.
So it can help with pain in this way. If you have pain for a long time, your neurological brain is used to always connecting to the pain. If you slow down a lot and have time to feel other feelings, your brain can learn to pay attention to other feelings and not just always go to the pain.
Mhm.
So, anyway, this is the big picture. And for now, what we do is I give instructions for movements, and you see how does it feel for me? If it doesn't feel good, you don't do it.
Mhm.
A lot of people will take a nap the whole class. That's also fine. Sometimes that's the best thing to do. It's really important you just keep checking with yourself. How am I? How do I feel? If you're feeling like I don't understand or I'm uncomfortable, you just stop, you rest, then you say, okay, I'm ready to come back. Maybe you say, I'm ready to take a nap. But it's an opportunity to learn how do you also take care of yourself. So before you get too comfortable, come up and stand. Stand as comfortably as you can, whatever that means for you, and just see what it feels like, what standing feels like for you. There's not a lot of creatures on the planet that walk on two legs, so it's really a fantastic feat that we have figured out as humans. So even as you stand there, you can consider for a moment, how is it that you don't fall over? What what sort of feeling do you have? What sort of effort or uh, muscular work do you feel that literally is keeping you from falling over? And then play with your own balance a little bit. So see, does it feel different if you're leaning more on one leg or the other leg? Does that change how well you can stand comfortably? Do you have a leg that you prefer to stand on? And then what else do you notice about standing? What do you feel about your back? Is your back somehow involved in standing? And what about your head and your neck and your shoulders? And then finally, what about your feet? How do you feel that your feet are involved in standing? And then keeping your awareness on as much of yourself as you can without strain, take a little walk around and just see how is it for you to walk? What parts of yourself do you feel are involved in walking? And now you're just collecting a little bit of data. In order to improve your awareness, you have to know how much awareness you have to start with. So at the end of class, you'll get a chance to check out these feelings and see if you have any change or clarity or whatever. And so for now, come back to your spot and come lay down on your back. If you're comfortable to have your legs long and your arms by your sides, then start there. And if that doesn't feel nice on your back for any reason, then start with your knees bent and your feet standing. And give yourself a little bit of time to settle into this situation. So what do you observe about yourself right now? How is it for you to be laying like this on the floor, knowing that you've just created an hour to either have a new experience or to connect to yourself in a particular way that you're familiar with? What's it like for you to be embarking on this journey at the beginning? And then pay attention to how your breathing is right now. Is there anything pleasant about the feeling of your breathing? Is there anything interesting? And then move your attention to the particular way that you're resting on the floor. And notice that you have this distribution of your weight down your legs, down your back, down your arms. And you might notice that there's differences on one side or the other side of you. There should be differences. So what kind of difference do you notice in the way that your right leg is standing or resting versus the way your left leg is? What kind of difference do you notice in your right and left shoulder? Your right and left arm connected to your shoulder. And then if you feel from the back of your right hip up to your right shoulder, and notice the way that that part of you rests on the floor, can you tell if there's any differences on how the left side from your left hip to your left shoulder rests on the floor? Now, interestingly, from all of those pieces, there's a central line that essentially connects your limbs, your shoulders, your hips, and that's a line of your spine. So see the way that you can feel a line of your spine that actually starts at the back of your head. Feel the way that your neck is from the back of your head to the top of your shoulders. And then can you keep sensing a line that goes down between your shoulders, down to your middle back, down to your low back? And then can you feel the difference from when your low back becomes the back of your hips or the back of your pelvis, and where the back of your hips or the back of your pelvis becomes your tailbone? And stay for a few moments with your attention on this line and see if you can get a sense of how it undulates, how the pressure along that line changes. And then keeping your attention on that line, do a super gentle movement of turning your head left and right. Go very slowly so you have time to pay attention to what you feel. And it's an interesting brain game to do a movement of your head while feeling this kind of imaginary line that goes all the way down to your tailbone. What's that like for you? Does it feel more comfortable to turn your head one way or the other way? Now leave that. Bring your head back to the middle, bend your knees and stand your feet. And feel the kind of footprints that your 2 feet are making. And then see what it's like to press your 2 footprints more down into the floor, and then let that go. And if it feels like a strain or it's awkward, then you might want to figure out if there's a better place for your 2 feet to be standing so that that movement feels easier. Maybe it's better if your feet are closer to you or farther from you. Maybe your feet need to be farther apart, closer together. There's not a right answer. You just see, for me, if I want to press my 2 feet down into the floor, what's the most comfortable way to do that? And it's likely for many of you that you've already discovered one of your many postural habits, which is when you push your feet down, something somewhere else clenches a little bit or contracts a little bit. And it's a funny, interesting game, little brain game to see, is it necessary? Or could I change how I'm doing this movement in some way so that I don't strain in that place? And that feeling that I get changes. See if you can start to connect the pressing of your feet to a very gentle lifting of your hips away from the floor. Try not to tighten in your abdomen or your back. Try not to get anywhere in particular with your hips. Just listen for how you could press your feet down gently and the least amount of effort to start to lift your hips away from the floor and then come back down very gently. And as you continue exploring this movement of very gently lifting your pelvis and very gently bringing it back down, you might start to notice that the pressure changes along your back. And the more that you lift your pelvis, the more the pressure goes up your back. And as you lower your pelvis, the pressure goes more down your back. And it doesn't matter how high you lift your pelvis. You just want to lift it as much as you can without straining. And pay attention to that little interplay between your hips getting lighter, but somewhere in your upper back and your shoulders getting heavier. What's that feel like? Some of you might notice, especially if you have a lot of mobility in this way, some of you might notice at some point as you're lifting your pelvis, there's a little shift in your head. The position of your head changes slightly. See if you can catch that happening. You don't have to do anything on purpose. You just see if you can discover it. Now here's one more question as you're exploring this movement, and that is this line of your spine that goes from your tail all the way up you to your head. What changes about that line when you lift your hips or when you bring your hips back down? Can you tell? You could say that you're lifting the bottom of the line, right? And the top of the line stays on the floor. Now pause for a second the next time your hips come down. Just pause as you are with your feet standing. And then interlace your fingers behind your head. Point your elbows toward the ceiling so that your two arms are making a kind of sling or a kind of basket for your head. And although this looks like a sit-up, it is not a sit-up. What it is an opportunity to see what it feels like to lift the top part of your spine. So see, without straining, if you can gently lift your head, just maybe a tiny bit, so that you feel your neck comes away from the floor, and keep feeling down your back and see what part of your spine comes away from the floor and what part of your spine goes down into the floor. And then bring your head back down. Try not to tighten your belly. Try not to tighten your chest or your neck. Try to find the interesting, comfortable way to lift your head so that you get a sense of bending in the top part of your spine. And as you keep exploring this movement, what's different if you look in the direction of your legs? Your eyes can be closed still, but you look at the direction of your legs as you lift your head. You could even think about lengthening the back of your head as you're lifting your head. But be honest with yourself. Where are you secretly straining a little bit? Right? Is there still some program that says that you want to be really good at this movement? So you just do something a little funny with your mouth, or you just hold your breath a little bit, or you just squeeze in your thighs a little bit. Right? This is what we call catch yourself doing something weird. And then what if your mouth was relaxed, your air was relaxed, and you didn't really care how much you lifted your head? You were just wondering if you could feel some new feelings in the top of your back. Great. Okay, now pause for a second. Rest your head, bring your arms down, keep your feet standing for now. And just refresh the way that you feel your back resting on the floor. And just resting without even doing anything, can you imagine the feeling of lifting one end of your spine and lifting the other end of your spine? Can you imagine how your spine changes shape when you do what you just did? And it's so fascinating because we all use our spine all day, every day, and yet most of us really don't know much about it. We don't know how it works. We don't know, there's certain parts we can't even feel. So you can just consider the potential for improvement if you start to clarify the parts of your spine, yeah? Okay, so interlace your fingers behind your head again. And this time, again, keep checking on yourself, right? I know these movements look like some sort of exercise movements. They're not. So point your elbows to the ceiling. So already you're not going to, use your neck as much as you would. And just see what it's like if you lift both ends of your spine at the same time. So you peel your head away from the floor as you lift your pelvis a little bit away from the floor. Just if you can do it without any strain, right? Don't get excited about it. Just see what you can find. And if it seems like, I don't know how to do that without strain, then you skip it and you just imagine what it would feel like. And whether you're imagining it or you're doing it, try letting your air come out as you lift your head and lift your pelvis. And see if that feels differently in your chest than if you breathe in as you lift your head and your hips. And then try it so that first you lift one end of your spine and then you lift the other end of your spine. And just see how that is for you to do. Just try that a few times, test it out, and of course we'll come back to it later. What's it like to first lift your pelvis, then lift your head? Try it just a few times and then let it go. Lengthen yourself out, bring your legs down, bring your arms down, rest on the floor. And check in with the overall feeling that you get laying on the floor. And something that I didn't say before, but I'll say as a reminder now, is that as we continue with the lesson, if there's ever a moment that you're getting agitated or sleepy or just can't really pay attention anymore, it means that you're full and it's time to take a break. So don't force yourself in any way, right? Like I said, you can literally sleep the whole lesson if that's what best serves you. You're not somehow copping out on the lesson. It's really part of the lesson to be listening to the cues that you get from your own mind. The other thing is that when you come to rest, if you're not comfortable resting on your back, change your position, right? Just keep checking. Let this be an experience of allowing yourself to actually feel comfort, because most of us have a default of not moving into comfort, right? Okay, now come over onto your belly. And just rest for a few moments on your belly, if that's a position that you can be in comfortably. Put one of your cheeks down. Have your arms either up or down, whatever is going to work for you. And see what it's like to be in this position. What do you notice about this line of your spine now that you're in this position? Your tailbone, the back of your hips or pelvis, the curvature of your low back, the curvature of your middle and upper back, the curvature of your neck, and the back of your head. And then if you can do so comfortably, push yourself back so that you're standing on hands and knees. And try to situate your arms underneath your shoulders and your legs underneath your pelvis so that you're using the least amount of effort to be in this position. And again, remember, right, there's many reasons why this position is uncomfortable. So don't strain. Rest whenever you need to rest. Take a pause, come back when you need to come back. But see if you can hang your head in this position. Now, sense your spine, the line of your spine, tailbone to the back of your head. Feel that your head is hanging in a comfortable way. And just use your belly. Keep your spine hanging like this. Use your belly and expand your belly down toward the floor. See if you could do that with your breathing so that you breathe in and your belly goes down to the floor. If that feels too complicated, you just find your own way. But see if you can expand your belly and then lift your belly a little bit up toward the ceiling. Just a movement of your belly. Very gently, very gently. And just doing that gentle movement of your belly, notice if you feel any changes in your spine. And then could you start to welcome your spine into the movement of your belly so that when you drop your belly, you kind of let your spine arch down toward the floor a little bit. You let your low back arch. And then when you lift your belly, you let your low back round a little bit up toward the ceiling. So you're following the movement of your belly. If you can, do it with your air. So you breathe in and your belly goes down toward the floor. Your belly gets wide and big. You breathe out and you just lift your belly a little bit toward the ceiling. Okay, take a little rest for your arms. Just sit back or lay down or whatever. Just rest for a second. Okay, and then when you're ready, see if you can come back to that position, or maybe you skip it if it's uncomfortable for you. Back to hands and knees. Still with your head hanging. Yeah. Feel the support of your arms and your legs. Make sure that you're not straining unnecessarily in your shoulders and your chest. And then continue just like you just were, so that as you breathe in, you hang your abdomen, yeah. And then as you breathe out, you lift your abdomen and you just let your spine follow. Now take your time, take your time, take your time. And of course, if you need to rest, rest. And as you continue exploring this movement, don't do your full range of motion, right? Stay in this super boring, comfortable zone, but find out as you're moving this bottom part of your spine, what's happening with the top part of your spine. Now, what if you do add in the top part of your spine? So when your belly goes down, look forward. Feel the shape of your neck and the shape of your low back. And then when your belly lifts up to the ceiling, look down, look toward your legs with your eyes. Feel the shape of your low back and feel the shape of your neck. So of course, a lot of you have done this 1,000 times in a fitness class or yoga class, and this is not that. This is a very, very specific observation of what you're doing with your spine. How many vertebrae can you feel moving? Are there some that are a little bit foggy in your sensei? Okay, let that go. Rest in your belly. If you can, comfortably put your forehead down on the floor and have your arms wide out in front of you like a V shape on the floor. Again, pay attention to the line of your spine from the back of your head to your tail. And see if you can do a very gentle movement of looking forward with your eyes, lifting your head just slightly, and then look down with your eyes and look in the direction of your chest. Bring in your belly. So as you look forward with your eyes, you press your belly into the floor. Inhale if you can do that comfortably. And then lift your belly a tiny bit from the floor as you look down at the floor and look toward your belly. Again, stay in the zone that you can do without any strain. And if you're straining, then you rest and you can just imagine what this movement feels like. What happens to the vertebra of your spine? When do the vertebra of your spine move toward the floor? And when do they move toward the ceiling? Can you tell which part of your back you're using? Is there any way to even out the distribution of effort? Notice that the bottom part of your spine is more or less fixed, right? And you're just doing a movement of the top part of your spine. Now leave that, roll on your back, take a rest on your back. And notice how your back is resting on the floor now. Maybe roll your head a little bit, check that you're not secretly accidentally starting to tighten in your neck. And just take a few moments paying attention to your breathing again. And in particular, what do you notice about the kind of movement of your breathing in your chest? The top of your chest, the bottom of your chest, the sides of your chest. Now bend your knees and stand your feet. And if you can do so comfortably, bring your knees into your chest and hold on to the sides of your knees with your two hands. See if you can let your ankles and your feet hang. And then keep your arms comfortably straight and start to press your knees into your hands away from you. And then come back. So you're holding onto your knees, your arms are straight. And you see what happens if your arms straight as they are, if you press your knees away from you. And what's the response that you feel in your shoulders? Do you see how when you press your knees into your hands, your shoulders come away from the floor? See if you can find that. And if you don't fix your neck, you might notice that your head tilts back. So move your knees away from your chest into your hands and let your head tilt back. Say again. So you're going to move your knees into your hands, push your knees into your hands. Keep going. Push your knees into your hands. See how your shoulders came away from the floor? Yeah. Now, as you do that, do you see how your chin just naturally lifted slightly? Did you notice that? Try again, see if you can feel it. You did feel it? Yeah. So let your knees go away from you. Press your knees away from you, like you were going to stand your feet again, but you don't. And let your head tilt back so your chin looks at the ceiling as your knees go away from you. And see, is that easier to do if you breathe in or if you breathe out? That's it. Feel how the shape of the back of your neck changes a little bit, and the shape of your low back changes a little bit. Catch yourself doing something weird. I can already catch some of you doing something weird. Some of you have decided that the best way to push your knees away is by clenching your belly. That's a funny habit. That seems pretty counterproductive, doesn't it? Some of you are clenching your jaw. What's the weird thing you're doing? Find out for yourself. What are you doing that you don't need to do so this movement can be light, simple, maybe even pleasant? Great. Okay, leave it. Rest again on your back. Come over onto your belly. Prop yourself up in your elbows. So your elbows are under your armpits. Yeah, like a Sphinx-ish pose. But it's not a Sphinx pose. Let your legs be as free and comfortable as possible. Close your eyes, but look forward. What shape do you feel? What's the shape of your spine as you're looking forward? Your spine from the back of your head all the way down to your tail. And see if you can find a very gentle way to breathe out and drop your head so that you look toward your own belly. And then when you breathe in, look forward again. And can you use your belly so that when you drop your head and you look at your belly, you lift your belly a little bit, maybe. And when you lift your head and you look forward, you press your belly lightly into the floor. You could see what happens if you let your air come out of your mouth. You might discover that that releases something that you're holding unnecessarily. Maybe just a few breaths, maybe in the nose, out the mouth, whatever you want to do. There's not a right way to breathe, but you just check that there's not a way you could soften a little bit in this movement. Check that you're not straining in your hands or in your arms or your shoulders. And again, just a quick question to yourself, which vertebra move toward the ceiling? Maybe a better question is, which vertebra do you not feel? Okay, great. Rest again on your belly. Come onto your back. Stand your feet. Have your arms by your sides, but put your hands closer to you than your elbows. So your elbows are bent and your hands are palms facing down somewhere by your waist, within whatever you can do with your shoulder situation. Reassess, especially if this is a weird situation for your shoulders right now. What's your spine like? Can you keep track of it now that all these other weird things are happening? And as you're breathing, what part of your chest is free to move? Notice with your feet standing as they are, if your knees are hugging together or if your legs are kind of falling out. Could you sort of soften the effort in your legs? Soften the effort in your belly and in your thighs, in your bum and in your back. See the shape of your spine, the curve of your neck, the curve of your low back, and see what happens if you increase the curve of your neck by lifting your chest and shoulders a little bit, maybe pressing into your elbows a little bit. And maybe you do that as you breathe in. Maybe it's better for you to do that as you breathe out. What works? And see if you can start to lift your shoulders and your chest so that there's more of an arch behind your neck. And it's as though you were going to lift the vertebra of your upper back up to the ceiling. What kind of crazy image is that? How could you possibly lift the vertebra of your upper back up toward the ceiling? Are you fighting yourself? It might seem ridiculous to lift your shoulders, but if you try it, you might discover that it's possible. And you might discover that lifting your shoulders makes it easier to tilt your head back. Of course, it depends on your shoulder neck situation, right? Maybe it's painful or uncomfortable. So you still manage yourself, but also just be open to trying something and see what you find there. Those of you that do yoga would perhaps associate this with a fish pose. Well, that was a little trick. If you do yoga and you associated that with the fish pose, did you immediately start doing the movement different? So what are you doing with your spine? With your spine? What is happening in order for you to lift your chest and tilt your head back? Odds are, if there's something disorienting or confusing about this movement, it's not really part of your spine's brain. All right, rest again, lengthen out your parts. Check and see, is anything changing in the way that you're making contact with the floor? There are parts of you that are starting to rest differently on the floor. Okay, and then one more time, come onto your belly, come to hands and knees. Of course, adjust however you need to, but see if you can put the top of your head down on the floor between your hands. Maybe you need your elbows to be on the floor, maybe not. Maybe that's just not a happy place for your head, so you skip it and you just rest and imagine it. And then if you can comfortably interlace your fingers and have your fingers above your forehead. So if that variation doesn't work for you, have your hands free or have your hands not on your head. The idea is that you're not bearing a lot of weight on your head. You're getting support from your arms and from your legs. So you don't need to tighten your neck or clench your teeth. And then you see how gently you can roll your head along the floor so that your forehead either rolls more onto your hands and off of your hands, or your forehead rolls along the floor. But of course, it's not a fancy new dance move. It has something to do with your spine. So slow down and see what parts of your spine can you feel responding to this funny movement of your head. What's interesting, again, for the super nerds, is that your head is fixed on the floor. You're not lifting your head is fixed on the floor. So it means that you use your spine in a very particular way. Right? And so maybe you do it once and you pause, you come back and you pause. Remember, don't just stay with something, right? Take your time. Yeah, if you feel any strain, just rest. Just rest. Definitely. There is the possibility of hurting yourself if you do too much. So you rest. Especially if you know you're already sensitive in your neck. There's no advantage to doing more in these lessons. Right? Eventually what you learn is that you can do the movements with less effort, but you have to learn how to do that. We don't know how to do it at first. So sometimes at first we strain by accident. Now, if you've come back and you're playing with the movement again, can you bring in your belly? So that as you inhale, your belly hangs down to the floor. And then as you exhale, your belly lifts up toward the ceiling. And notice how your spine changes shape. What happens to those mysterious bones of your spine between your shoulders? Do they lift toward the ceiling or do they drop toward the floor? And if it's not easy and pleasant, then don't do it. There's no advantage to trying something that is unpleasant. You'll do that for the rest of your day, probably. Okay, great. So if you're not resting already, then take a rest. Come onto your back. Lengthen yourself out. See what the floor feels like now. Notice the way that you see your spine. From your tailbone, along the back of your hips, along the curvature of the small of your back, your low back, along the back of your ribs, the bottom, along your spine, between your shoulders, to the base of your neck, and your spine along your neck to the back of your head. Reassess the way that your breathing feels after exploring these variations with your spine. Is there any change in the feeling of your breathing? And then finally, bend your knees and stand your feet again. Interlace your fingers behind your head. And start by gently pressing your feet into the floor. And this time when you lift your pelvis, can you think about doing it piece by piece? First your tail, then the back of your hips, then the bones of your low back, then the bones of your middle back. Again, just seeing how high you can lift without strain. And the quality of that lifting movement. And see if this time you can notice more about the way your upper back presses as your lower back lifts. Do you feel any change in your chest when you lift your hips? Leave your hips down and try just lifting the top of your spine. Lift your skull and the top of your neck, middle of your neck, bottom of your neck. And feel which parts of your low back go down to the floor when you're lifting parts of your upper back away from the floor. If your spine was like a chain, some of the links of the chain lift on one end and the links on the other end go down. Okay, and then pause again for just a moment. And then finally, I'll just say it again first before you do it even, so you can take your time doing your own research. But you're going to explore what it feels like to alternate. So you'll have your hands behind your head with your elbows looking at the ceiling so that your arms are like a crane to lift your head. And then you'll alternate first lifting your pelvis as high as you can without any strain, very comfortably. Keep your pelvis lifted and start to lift your head. And what you'll start to find is when you lift your head, your pelvis is naturally going to go down. And then once your pelvis goes down, start to lift it again. And as you lift your pelvis, your head will start to go down. And take your time listening for this interesting feeling of change going up and down your back. The pressure changing, going up and down your spine. And check that you're using your air to feel comfortable instead of holding your breath. Feel that you're using your arms to lift your head, not your chest and your neck. And you might even be able to discover a few more vertebrae just by pressing them down into the floor and lifting them from the floor. So track how many vertebrae can you feel on the top end and on the bottom end. And overall, is this movement a little bit different from when we started the lesson? Which vertebra press into the floor to support the vertebra lifting from the floor? Okay. Let the middle vertebra come down to lift your head. And then let them come down to lift your pelvis. Great. Okay. And then when you're done your research, let it go and take a nice rest on your back. For those of you that build a home practice, I use parts of this lesson in my home practice. I find it extremely therapeutic. There's a lot of parts of my spine that I forget about, and it's a wonderful way to remind your brain about the parts of your spine that you don't see or feel on a regular basis. But now reassess as you're laying there if there's a difference between your right leg and your left leg. Has that changed at all since the beginning of the lesson? Is there a difference in how your two shoulders are resting on the floor? And then what do you notice about the part of you from the back of your right hip to your right shoulder? And is that different somehow from the back of your left hip to your back of your left shoulder? And check again and see if you turn your head very gently, very, very slowly left and right. How deep into your spine can you feel as you do that movement? rest as long as you'd like to rest, but also do come back to standing and walking and pay attention to how that is for you. If there's anything different about what standing and walking feel like. See if you can stay present to what you are feeling for at least another 5 minutes. Yeah. And I will see you soon.